The car door slammed shut with a finality that Ruth would later recognize as fate clicking into place. Her chest heaved as she pressed herself against the leather seat, hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together. Through the tinted windows, she could still see them. Dozens of phones pointed at her like weapons, flashes going off like small explosions, faces twisted in curiosity and something darker she couldn't name. The anxiety crawled up her throat like a living thing, threatening to choke her. This was supposed to be fun. Just a simple afternoon party. The kind where you laugh too loud and dance without caring who's watching. But somewhere between walking through those doors and trying to grab a drink, everything had shifted. The stares had started immediately, they always did, but today they'd felt different. Heavier. More invasive. Someone had whispered AI eyes and laughed. Another had straight up blocked her path to take a selfie without asking. The crowd had pressed closer and closer until the room felt like it was shrinking, until she couldn't breathe, until running felt like the only option. So she'd run. Straight out the venue doors and into the first car she'd seen with its door unlocked. Taxi. It had to be a taxi. Please God, let it be a taxi. Ruth squeezed her eyes shut. Those infamous blue eyes that had followed her from Chicago to Seoul, from childhood to adulthood, from her grandmother's funeral to this exact moment of panic. She could still hear her grandmother's voice. Baby girl, those eyes are a gift from our ancestors. The Vardenberg syndrome runs in our blood like a river, and you carry the most beautiful part of it. Beautiful, right? Tell that to the kids who'd called her a freak in elementary school. Tell that to the Korean ajumas who stared at her on the subway like she was a museum exhibit. Tell that to the party guests who'd just treated her like a circus attraction. The driver's door opened. Ruth's eyes snapped open, and her breath caught in her throat for an entirely different reason. The man who slid into the driver's seat was unexpected. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that seemed to calculate everything in a single glance, black hair pushed back carelessly. He wore a simple black shirt, but something about the way he carried himself suggested he was used to much more expensive clothes. For a moment, he just stared at her in the rearview mirror, and Ruth felt her anxiety spike again. I'm so sorry, she blurted out, words tumbling over themselves. I know I just jumped in your car like a crazy person, but I really need a ride and I saw this was a taxi and… Wait, this is a taxi, right? Please tell me this is a taxi because if not, this is super awkward and also maybe illegal. I don't even know the laws here. I mean, I've lived in Seoul for 2 years, but… It's a taxi, he said, his voice smooth and slightly amused. Korean accent, but his English was flawless. Where do you need to go? Relief flooded through her so intensely she almost laughed. Oh, thank God. Okay, Itaewon? The apartment complex near the Hamilton Hotel? Do you know it? He nodded, starting the engine with a quiet purr that seemed too refined for a taxi. But Ruth was too grateful to question it. As they pulled away from the curb, Ruth caught a glimpse of confused party guests spilling out onto the street, phones still in hand. She sank lower in her seat. Bad party? The driver asked, navigating through Seoul's afternoon traffic with practiced ease. The worst? Ruth groaned, finally allowing herself to relax slightly. I mean, it started okay. There was good music and these little sandwich things that were amazing. But then people just… God, why am I telling you this? You probably don't want to hear about my disaster of a social life. I've got time, he said, and something in his tone made her believe he actually meant it. Maybe it was the adrenaline crash. Maybe it was the fact that he was a stranger she'd never see again. Maybe it was just that she was so tired of holding everything in. But Ruth started talking. It's the eyes, she said, gesturing at her face. I have Vardenberg syndrome. It's this genetic condition that affects pigmentation. Most people just get the white forelock of hair or different colored eyes, but I got the whole package. Blue eyes, dark skin, and apparently an invitation for everyone to stare at me like I'm not a real person. She watched his eyes flick to the rearview mirror, studying her reflection. But unlike the hungry stares at the party, his gaze felt curious, assessing, not cruel. In Chicago, people were used to diversity, she continued, the words flowing faster now. I was just Ruth, you know? Funny Ruth who brought homemade cookies to work. Ruth who cried during sad commercials. Ruth, who accidentally adopted 3 stray cats because she couldn't say no. But here, I love Seoul. I really do. But sometimes I feel like I'm on display every single day. And today I couldn't take it anymore. So you ran, he said simply. So I ran, she confirmed, laughing a little at how ridiculous it sounded. Straight into a stranger's car, which, now that I think about it, is probably not the smartest survival strategy. Probably not, he agreed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. But brave. Ruth blinked. Brave. Running takes courage too, knowing when to leave, when to protect yourself. He took a turn smoothly, and Ruth noticed his hands on the wheel, strong, controlled, with a silver ring on his right index finger that caught the light. Most people just endure. Something about that observation settled warm in her chest. Yeah, well, I'm trying to do less enduring and more living. Life's too short to spend it being someone else's entertainment. You know? They fell into an easy conversation after that. He asked about her work. She taught English at a private academy and did freelance translation on the side. She asked about he gave vague answers about business and investments. But he was so good at turning questions back to her that she barely noticed. Ruth found herself telling him about her favorite spots in Seoul. The tiny bookshop in Anguk that sold English novels, the Han River at sunset, the pojamika that made the best tteokbokki she'd ever tasted. He listened like every word mattered, occasionally offering his own recommendations in return. There's a place in Gangnam, he said. Very quiet, very private. They make this French-Korean fusion dessert that would change your life. Is that a professional opinion? Ruth teased. I take my desserts very seriously. She laughed. Really laughed. For the first time all day. I can respect that. I'm more of a savory person myself, but I'd try anything once. Brave, he said again, softer this time. The drive felt both too long and too short. Ruth couldn't remember the last time she talked to someone so easily, so naturally. Usually, first conversations were full of awkward pauses and forced small talk. But this felt like catching up with an old friend, even though they just met, even though she didn't even know his name. Too soon, they were pulling up to her building. This is it, Ruth said, reluctance creeping into her voice. She reached for her purse, pulling out her wallet. What do I owe you? Nothing, he said immediately. What? No. Come on. You drove all the way here. Consider it a rescue fee. No charge for emergency evacuations. Ruth wanted to argue, but something in his tone told her he wouldn't budge. Instead, she smiled. The genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her unusual eyes. Thank you. Seriously. You kind of saved me today. Ruth, he said. And she realized with a start that she'd never told him her name. She must have mentioned it during her rambling. Those eyes of yours, they're not something to hide. Anyone who makes you feel otherwise isn't worth your time. Her breath caught. She wanted to ask his name, wanted to say something meaningful in return. But all she managed was another quiet thank you before she stepped out of the car. As she walked toward her building, she turned back once. He was still there, watching her through the window with an expression she couldn't quite read. She waved. He didn't wave back, but she thought she saw him smile before the car pulled away. Ruth stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, her heart still racing but no longer from anxiety. Something had shifted. The world felt a little less heavy than it had an hour ago. She didn't know his name, didn't know if she'd ever see him again. But as she rode the elevator up to her apartment, she couldn't stop replaying their conversation, couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd said her name, the way he'd looked at her like she was a person and not a phenomenon. Inside her apartment, her 3 cats, Machi, Dumpling, and Chairman Meow, greeted her with their usual demanding meows. Ruth fed them, changed into comfortable clothes, and tried to settle into her normal evening routine. But normal felt different now. Everything felt different. Her phone buzzed with messages from acquaintances at the party. Where did you go? Are you okay? Sorry about the photos. People were being weird. She didn't respond. Instead, she made herself tea and stood by her window, looking out at Seoul's glittering skyline. Somewhere out there was a kind taxi driver who'd given her more than just a ride home. He'd given her back a piece of herself she'd been losing little by little. The Ruth who believed she deserved kindness, who could laugh freely, who was worth more than the curiosity her appearance generated. She didn't know that at that exact moment, in a penthouse across the city, a man named Kang Do-hyun was standing at his own window, thinking about blue eyes and genuine laughter and the way a woman had trusted him completely without knowing who he really was. She didn't know that he'd already made a decision, one that would change both their lives forever. She didn't know that fate wasn't done with them yet, but she would learn soon. Kang Do-hyun had built an empire on patience and precision. In his world, the shadowy realm of underground operations, strategic investments, and carefully maintained power, impulse was weakness. Emotion was leverage. And yet, 3 days after dropping off a woman with impossible blue eyes, he found himself doing something completely irrational. He was trying to find her again. "You're joking," Min-jae said, staring at his boss with undisguised shock. Min-jae had been Do-hyun's right hand for 7 years, had seen him negotiate with politicians and eliminate threats without blinking, but he'd never seen him like this. "You want me to locate a woman based on what? That she lives near the Hamilton Hotel and has 3 cats. And teaches English," Do-hyun added calmly, reviewing reports on his tablet without looking up. They were in his office, 30 floors above Seoul, all glass and steel and calculated intimidation. Translation work on the side. American. Chicago originally. "It shouldn't be difficult. Sir, with respect. This is insane. You don't chase women. Women chase you. You ignore them. It's your whole thing." Do-hyun finally looked up, and Min-jae immediately regretted his candor. Those dark eyes could cut through steel when they wanted to. "Find her," Do-hyun said quietly. "Today." Min-jae knew better than to argue further. "Yes, sir." The truth was, Do-hyun couldn't explain it himself. He'd spent 3 days trying to focus on business, a shipment negotiation, a territorial dispute, the usual complexities of running an organization that didn't officially exist. But his mind kept wandering back to that car ride, to the way Ruth had talked with her whole body, hands gesturing wildly as she described her cat's individual personalities, eyes lighting up when she mentioned her favorite bookshop. She'd been so unguarded, so genuinely herself. In Do-hyun's world, everyone wore masks. Everyone wanted something. Everyone calculated their words and measured their smiles. But Ruth had just been Ruth. Messy, honest, kind, funny. She'd looked at him like he was a person, not a weapon or a commodity or a threat. It had been intoxicating. More than that, something she'd said had lodged itself in his chest and wouldn't let go. Life's too short to spend it being someone else's entertainment. Do-hyun had spent his entire adult life being exactly that. Entertainment, fear, power, mystery. He'd built his reputation on being unknowable, untouchable. And in 5 minutes, a woman running from a party had made him wonder what it might feel like to just be known. By evening, Min-jae had found her. Ruth Coleman, 28, teaching at Excellence English Academy in Gangnam, freelance translator for 3 Seoul-based companies, living alone, well, with 3 cats, in a modest apartment in Itaewon. No criminal record, no debts, no red flags. Just a normal woman living a normal life. Her social media is barely active, Min-jae reported, pulling up her sparse Instagram profile. Few friends, mostly posts about her cats and food. She seems to keep to herself. Do-hyun studied the photos. Ruth at the Han River, laughing at something off camera. Ruth holding up a ridiculous coffee drink. Ruth with her cats, her blue eyes bright with affection. Each picture felt like a small rebellion against the cruelty she described, a determination to find joy anyway. "What's your play here, boss?" Min-jae asked carefully. "You can't exactly walk up and say, 'Hi, remember me? I'm actually not a taxi driver. I'm the head of the Kong organization. Want to get coffee?'" "No," Do-hyun agreed. "I can't." The question was what he could do. He needed a reason to be in her life, something that wouldn't terrify her or seem suspicious, something natural, organic. Took him 2 more days to find it. Ruth's favorite bookshop, the one in Anguk she'd mentioned, was a small, cramped place called Between the Lines. Do-hyun had Min-jae make discreet inquiries and learned that the owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Park, was struggling financially. The building's rent had increased, and she was considering closing. Perfect. Do-hyun bought the building through one of his legitimate holding companies. Then he did something he'd never done before. He showed up in person. The bookshop smelled like old paper and jasmine tea. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with books in Korean and English. A worn armchair by the window. Classical music playing softly in the background. And there, in the corner, completely absorbed in a book, was Ruth. She wore jeans and an oversized sweater, her natural hair pulled back in a messy bun. No makeup, no pretense. Just Ruth exactly as she was. Something in Do-hyun's chest tightened. He approached the counter, where Mrs. Park was sorting through invoices with a worried expression. "Excuse me," he said in Korean. "I heard you might be closing." Mrs. Park looked up, startled. "Oh yes, unfortunately. The rent has become impossible and—" "Wait, do I know you?" "No, but I'd like to help. I've recently acquired this building, and I'd like to offer you a new lease. Same space, but at your previous rate." Mrs. Park's eyes went wide. "What? But why would you?" "I believe in supporting small businesses," Do-hyun said smoothly, "especially ones that serve the community. Consider it an investment in culture." "This is..." Mrs. Park pressed a hand to her heart. "This is a miracle. Thank you so much." Her exclamation was loud enough that Ruth looked up from her book. Their eyes met across the shop, and Do-hyun watched recognition dawn on her face. Surprise, confusion, then a brilliant smile that made his careful planning feel worth it. She stood up, nearly dropping her book. "Taxi driver?" "Ruth," he acknowledged, allowing himself a small smile. "Small world." She walked over, that natural enthusiasm evident in every step. "What are you doing here?" "Wait, you like books?" "Of course you like books. Everyone likes books. I mean, not everyone, but..." She stopped herself, laughing. "Sorry, I'm doing the rambling thing again, aren't I?" "I don't mind," he said honestly. "Mrs. Park, do you know this man?" Ruth asked. "He's the taxi driver who rescued me from that horrible party last week." "Taxi driver?" Mrs. Park looked confused, glancing between them. Do-hyun made a split-second decision. The lie was getting complicated, and Ruth deserved better than deception, even if he couldn't tell her everything. "Actually, that was a bit of a misunderstanding. I'm not a taxi driver. I was borrowing a friend's car that day. He drives for a taxi company. You seemed distressed, so I didn't correct you." Ruth's eyes widened. "Oh my God. You let me ramble for 20 minutes thinking you were a taxi driver when you were just some random guy with a taxi car? You needed help. The specifics seemed less important than getting you home safely." She stared at him for a moment, then burst out laughing. "That is either really kind or really weird. I haven't decided which. Can't it be both?" "Fair point." She studied him with open curiosity. "So, if you're not a taxi driver, what are you?" "Businessman," he said, which was technically true. "Real estate, mostly. Investments. And you just happened to buy Mrs. Park's building and show up here today?" "I did buy the building. Showing up here was intentional. I wanted to see you again." The honesty clearly surprised her. Ruth blinked, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Oh, that's direct. I don't believe in wasting time." Clearly. She bit her lip, and Do-hyun found himself distracted by the gesture. "So you bought an entire building to maybe run into me?" "I bought a building to help a struggling business. Running into you was the part one was hoping for." Mrs. Park made a noise that was definitely a knowing chuckle. But when they both looked at her, she suddenly became very interested in organizing her counter. Ruth shifted her weight, and Do-hyun could see her, trying to figure him out. He was used to people being intimidated by him, but she just seemed intrigued. Cautious, yes, but not afraid. "I don't usually let strangers into my life," she said finally. "I'm kind of weird about trust." "I understand. You don't know me. But I want to," she admitted, and the vulnerability in those words struck him harder than he expected. "Which is weird because I literally just met you twice, and one of those times you were pretending to be a taxi driver, which should probably be a red flag. But you were kind to me when I needed it. And you just saved Mrs. Park's shop. And you actually want to see me again, even though you've seen my anxiety spiral and my rambling and my weird eyes." "Your eyes aren't weird," Do-hyun interrupted quietly. "They're extraordinary." Ruth went still. "You say that, but you don't understand what it's like." "Then tell me." Have coffee with me. Right now, if you're free. I'd like to hear about it. About you. All of it. She searched his face, and Do-hyun had the strange sense of being seen in a way he hadn't allowed in years. Finally, she smiled, tentative but genuine. Okay, coffee. But I'm buying. Since you just spent probably a fortune on a building. I'm not sure that's how this works. Take it or leave it, mysterious businessman. I'll take it, he said immediately. They ended up at a small cafe a few blocks away, tucked into a corner table. Ruth ordered some elaborate vanilla latte with extra foam. Do-hyun ordered black coffee and watched her add 3 packets of sugar to her already sweet drink. Sweet tooth, he observed. Life's bitter enough, she said with a grin. Coffee doesn't need to be. And then she started talking, really talking, about growing up in Chicago, about her grandmother who'd raised her and taught her to be proud of her unique features, about the Vardenberg syndrome that ran through her family line like a thread of magic and difficulty intertwined. My grandmother had the white forelock, Ruth explained, running a hand through her own dark hair. No white streak, but she loved it. She used to say it was like having a piece of lightning in her hair. She made everything seem like magic, you know? The different colored eyes, the hearing difficulties some of us had. She turned it all into stories about ancestors who could see the future or hear spirits. She sounds wonderful, Do-hyun said. She was. Ruth's smile turned sad. She died 3 years ago. That's actually why I came to Korea. I needed a change. Needed to figure out who I was without her. She'd always been my biggest defender, my cheerleader. Without her, I had to learn to be that for myself. And have you? Learned. Ruth considered this, swirling the foam in her cup. Some days are better than others. Today's a good day, actually. I ran into a mysterious non-taxi driver who seems genuinely interested in my life story. I am, Do-hyun said. More than you know. They talked for 2 hours. Ruth told him about her cats, about her students, about the challenges of being a black woman in Korea, the stares, the touching of her hair without permission, the constant questions, but also the unexpected kindness, the ajumma who gave her free fruit at the market, the students who wrote her thank you notes. It's complicated, she said. I love it here, but I'm also exhausted by it. Some days I feel like I'm performing just by existing, you know? Like I can't just be a person going about my day. I have to be the black woman with blue eyes, the curiosity, the story everyone wants to hear. Do-hyun understood that more than she knew. The constant performance, the inability to just exist without being watched, assessed, judged. But he couldn't tell her that, not yet. What makes you happy? He asked instead. When you're not performing. When you're just Ruth. What brings you joy? She thought about it, really thought about it. Small things, mostly. My cat's purring on my lap. Finding a new book I can't put down. Really good food that makes me close my eyes and appreciate it. Rain on windows. Genuine laughter, not polite laughter, but the kind where you forget to be self-conscious. Moments where I feel connected, seen. Like right now, actually. Their eyes met, and Do-hyun felt something shift between them. Something fragile and promising and terrifying. Can I see you again? He asked. You're very persistent, aren't you? When something matters, yes. Ruth smiled, pulling out her phone. Okay, mysterious businessman. Give me your number. But fair warning, I'm going to actually use it. I'm not good at playing games. Good, Do-hyun said, taking her phone and entering his personal number. Something only Min Jae and 2 other people in the world had. Neither am I. As they left the cafe, Ruth walked beside him easily, talking about a new recipe she wanted to try. Do-hyun found himself listening not just to her words but to the music in her voice, the way she gestured when she got excited, the way she existed so fully in each moment. He was in dangerous territory, he knew. Getting close to someone meant risk. For him, for his organization, for her. But as Ruth laughed at something stupid he'd said, her blue eyes bright with genuine amusement, Do-hyun realized he'd already made his choice. He'd just have to find a way to make this work. To protect her from his world while keeping her in his life. To deserve the trust she was slowly offering him. It would be complicated. Dangerous. Possibly impossible. But watching Ruth wave goodbye at her apartment building, turning back once to grin at him with that radiant smile, Do-hyun thought it might be worth it. He didn't know yet that might be would become absolutely is. He didn't know that Ruth would become the one person who could see past every wall he'd built. He didn't know that loving her would be the bravest and most terrifying thing he'd ever done. But he was about to find out. 3 months into knowing Kang Do-hyun, Ruth was fairly certain she was falling in love, which was both wonderful and absolutely terrifying. They'd fallen into a rhythm. Coffee dates that turned into dinner dates that turned into long walks along the Han River at sunset. He'd met her cats. Chairman Meow had immediately claimed his lap, which Ruth took as a sign. She'd introduced him to her favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurants. He grimaced through extremely spicy tteokbokki to make her laugh. They texted constantly. His messages were surprisingly funny, dry observations about his day that made her giggle at inappropriate moments during classes. But there were still gaps. Pieces of himself he kept carefully locked away. He never talked about his family. When she asked about his work, his answers were vague. Meetings, negotiations, business travel. He'd disappear sometimes for a day or two with only brief explanations. And there was an edge to him, something watchful and calculating that would occasionally surface before he smoothed it away. Ruth told herself everyone had secrets, that people revealed themselves in their own time, that what mattered was how he treated her, with kindness, respect, genuine interest. He listened when she talked about her difficult days, her frustrations, her dreams. He remembered tiny details she'd mentioned in passing. He made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had. But still, the gaps nagged at her. Came to a head on a Friday evening. They were supposed to have dinner, but Do-hyun had canceled last minute, the 3rd time in 2 weeks. His text was apologetic but brief. Something came up. I'm sorry. Tomorrow instead. Ruth stared at the message, Chairman Meow purring obliviously on her chest. The rational part of her brain said it was fine, people got busy. But the anxious part, the part that had learned to protect herself, whispered that maybe she was being stupid. Maybe she didn't actually know him at all. Maybe this was all just an elaborate game to someone clearly way out of her league. She was spiraling into this thought pattern when her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Is this Ruth Coleman? A male voice, Korean accent, formal tone. Yes, who's this? My name is Min Jae. I work for Kang Do-hyun. There's been an incident. He asked me to call you. Ruth sat up so fast that Chairman Meow yowled in protest. What kind of incident? Is he okay? He's fine, but he's asking for you. Can you come to this address? He rattled off a location in Gangnam. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Ruth threw on clothes and practically ran to the nearest taxi, her mind racing through possibilities. Car accident? Medical emergency? Why would he ask for her specifically? The address Min Jae had given her was a sleek high-rise, all modern architecture and intimidating security. A man in a black suit met her at the entrance, presumably Min Jae. He was young, professional, and watching her with an expression that seemed almost apologetic. Thank you for coming, he said, guiding her to a private elevator. He's on the top floor. I should warn you. Warn me about what? Min Jae hesitated, then seemed to decide against whatever he was going to say. Just let him explain. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, Ruth stepped into what could only be described as a penthouse. Massive windows overlooking Seoul, expensive furniture, the kind of wealth that made her modest apartment feel like a shoebox. And there was Do-hyun, sitting on a couch with an ice pack pressed to his jaw, his shirt torn at the shoulder, a cut above his eyebrow that had been recently cleaned. Oh my God! Ruth rushed over, her hands hovering uncertainly. What happened to you? Ruth, he said, and his voice was rough, tired in a way she'd never heard before. I need to tell you something. Several things, actually. And you're probably going to want to leave, but I'm asking you to hear me out first. She sank onto the couch beside him, her heart pounding. You're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry. He set down the ice pack and turned to face her fully. Those dark eyes that had always been so controlled now held something raw, almost desperate. I'm not who you think I am. Well, I am, but I'm also more. Worse, depending on how you look at it. Do-hyun, what are you talking about? I run an organization, not a legal one. We operate in the spaces between laws, protection, information, strategic operations that powerful people need handled discreetly. Some people call us the con group. Others use less polite terms. Ruth processed this slowly. You're telling me you're in the Mafia? That's the simplified version, yes. She stood up, needing space to think. Her mind was reeling. The kind businessman who'd saved her favorite bookshop. The man who'd spent an hour playing with her cats. The person she'd been falling in love with. Criminal. The taxi, she said suddenly. That first day, you weren't borrowing a friend's car. You used your own taxi car to avoid attention. Yes. And the building you bought for Mrs. Park? I do own it. That part was true. But I own a lot of buildings in Seoul. Most people just don't know it. Ruth laughed, but it sounded slightly hysterical even to her own ears. So what, you saw me at a party, decided I was interesting and just… What? Decided to play normal guy to see what would happen? No. Do-hyun stood too, keeping his distance but his eyes never leaving hers. I saw you at a party and you ran. You sat in my car terrified and anxious, and then you started talking, really talking, being completely yourself, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Everyone in my world wears masks. Ruth. Everyone lies, manipulates, calculates. But you were just… you. Honest, kind, funny. Everything I didn't know I'd been missing. So you lied to me for 3 months? I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. And I know that's semantics. I know it doesn't make it better. But Ruth… His voice cracked slightly. I was trying to give us a chance. To let you know me, the real me, before you knew what I was. Because I knew. I knew if you found out too soon, you'd run. And I couldn't lose you before I even had you. Tears were burning in Ruth's eyes. You should have trusted me with the truth. You're right. But I was afraid. And I'm not used to being afraid. What happened tonight? She asked, gesturing at his injuries. Why did you really cancel? Do-hyun's jaw tightened. A rival organization tried to send a message. They failed, obviously, but it got messy. And I realized that if something had happened to me, you would have never known why. You deserved to know what you were getting into, who I am, what being with me could mean. What it could mean? Ruth repeated. You mean danger. You mean becoming a target. Possibly. I have security, protection. But yes, there's always risk in my world. Ruth wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the room's perfect temperature. I don't know what to do with this. I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm just asking you not to leave yet. Please. She looked at him, really looked at him. The man she'd been falling for and this stranger who ran a criminal organization. Trying to reconcile the two, to understand how they could be the same person. Tell me everything, she said finally. No more gaps. If you want any chance of me staying, I need the whole truth. So he told her. About inheriting the organization from his father at 25. About the world of power and violence and impossible choices he navigated daily. About the legitimate businesses he ran alongside the illegal ones. About Min Jae and his small circle of trusted people. About the enemies who would love to use her against him, and the precautions he'd already put in place to protect her even before tonight. I don't kill indiscriminately, he said quietly. I don't deal in drugs or trafficking or anything that harms the vulnerable. I have lines I won't cross. But I'm not a good man, Ruth. I've done things that would horrify you. Made choices I can't take back. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to be honest. Finally. Completely. Ruth sat down again, her mind spinning. This was insane. She should leave. Run just like she'd run from that party. Protect herself from this complicated, dangerous world she'd stumbled into. But then she thought about the last 3 months. The way Do-hyun listened to her stories about difficult students. The time he'd brought her favorite tea when she was sick. How he'd spent an entire evening helping her paint her apartment. Even though he was clearly not dressed for manual labor. The way he looked at her like she was precious, important, worth his time. Why me? She asked. You could have anyone. Someone from your world who understands it, who wouldn't be shocked by all this. Do-hyun moved closer, cautiously, like approaching something fragile. Because everyone in my world wants something from me. Power, protection, money, access. But you wanted to split a bill for coffee. You worried about whether I liked your cats. You just wanted me to be a person. With you, I get to be Do-hyun. Not the head of the Kong organization. Not a weapon or a commodity. Just me. I don't know if I'm brave enough for this, Ruth whispered. You're the bravest person I know. You left everything familiar and moved across the world. You face stares and judgment every day and still choose kindness. You ran from a party straight into a stranger's car and somehow turned that into something beautiful. That was stupidity, not bravery. It was both, just like this could be. He knelt in front of her, and Ruth's breath caught at the vulnerability in his eyes. I know I'm asking for a lot. I know you have every right to walk away. But I'm in love with you, Ruth. Completely, terrifyingly in love with you. And I hope you might feel the same way. The tears spilled over then. 'Cause yes, damn it, she did. She loved this complicated, dangerous, impossibly gentle man who made her laugh and listened to her ramble and looked at her like she was the most important thing in his world. I do, she admitted, her voice breaking. I love you too, which is why this is so hard. Then let me make it easier. Ask me anything. Tell me your fears. Let me prove that this can work. So Ruth asked, about his daily life, about the violence, about what he actually did versus what his subordinates did, about whether he'd ever go to prison, whether she'd be complicit in crimes just by knowing him, whether loving him made her a bad person. Do-hyun answered everything. Honest, direct, holding nothing back. Some of his answers made her flinch. Others surprised her. But through it all, he never looked away, never minimized, never made excuses. I can't promise you a normal life, he said finally. I can't promise there won't be danger or complications or moments where my world intrudes on ours. But I can promise you honesty from now on. Protection. Everything I have, everything I am. And the choice, always the choice, to walk away if it becomes too much. I don't want normal, Ruth said, surprising herself. Normal hasn't exactly been working out for me anyway. But I need to understand something. In your world, are my eyes still going to be a spectacle? Am I going to be Kang Do-hyun's unusual girlfriend? Or can I just be Ruth? Do-hyun's expression hardened in a way that was honestly a little frightening. Anyone who disrespects you answers to me. You're not a spectacle or a curiosity. You're Ruth, brilliant, kind, stronger than you know. And anyone in my organization or outside of it who treats you as anything less will regret it. Despite everything, Ruth felt herself smile slightly. That's very sweet and also slightly terrifying. I contain multitudes. She laughed and somehow, that broke the tension. She reached out, gently touching the cut above his eyebrow. Does it hurt? Not anymore. They sat in silence for a moment, Ruth processing everything, Do-hyun waiting with a patience that must be costing him dearly. Finally, Ruth spoke. I need time, not to decide if I love you, I already know I do, but to figure out if I can actually do this. If I can be with someone whose life is so complicated. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. And while I'm figuring this out, I want you to tell me about your culture too. About being Korean, about the pressures you face, about what it's like living in your world. Because if we're going to be together, if we're going to try this, I want to understand all of you. Not just the parts you think I can handle. Something in Do-hyun's expression softened. I'd like that. And I want to learn more about yours too. About Vardenberg syndrome, about your grandmother's stories, about what it means to carry your heritage. Not just the challenges, but the magic of it. The way you see the world through those extraordinary eyes. Ruth felt her heart crack open a little more. You really mean that, don't you? Every word. She took a deep breath, then made a decision that was probably reckless and definitely brave. Okay, let's try. But we do this right. Complete honesty, no more secrets, and the minute it gets too dangerous or too complicated, we reevaluate. Deal? Deal? Do-hyun said immediately, relief flooding his features. Ruth leaned forward and kissed him, soft and gentle and full of promise. When they pulled apart, she noticed he was smiling in a way she'd never quite seen before. Unreserved, genuine, happy. What? She asked. Chairman Meow is going to be insufferable when he finds out you're staying. He already acts like he owns the place when I visit. Ruth laughed, the sound bright and free. He's a cat. He thinks he owns everything. They spent the rest of the night talking, really talking. Do-hyun told her about growing up preparing to inherit an empire he'd never asked for. about the weight of responsibility and the isolation of power. Ruth told him more about her grandmother, about the stories of their ancestors, about how Vardenberg syndrome wasn't just a condition but a connection to her family's history, their strength, their uniqueness. In our family, she explained, the blue eyes were called Heaven's Mark. My grandmother said we could see possibilities others couldn't, futures that hadn't been written yet. Obviously, that's not scientifically true, but I loved the idea that my difference was actually a gift. It is a gift, Do-hyun said seriously. I saw it the first time I looked at you, not the color, the way you see the world, with hope, with kindness, even after everything you've been through. Maybe that's what we both need, Ruth said softly. Someone who sees us differently than the world does. Someone who sees the person, not the position or the condition or the expectations. Maybe, Do-hyun agreed, pulling her closer. The next few months were an education for both of them. Ruth learned about Do-hyun's world, the legitimate businesses he ran, the complicated network of loyalty and power, the constant chess game of strategy and protection. She met Min-jae properly, and then others in his inner circle, each one initially suspicious but gradually won over by her genuine interest in their lives. Her refusal to judge. Do-hyun learned about Ruth's heritage in depth. She showed him photos of her grandmother, taught him about the genetic variations of Vardenberg syndrome, explained the cultural weight of being black in spaces that weren't built for her. He listened with an intensity that made her feel truly heard, asking questions that showed he was trying to understand, not just accept. They navigated the challenges together. When someone in Do-hyun's organization made a thoughtless comment about Ruth's appearance, Do-hyun's response was swift and severe enough that it never happened again. When Ruth had a panic attack at a social event with Do-hyun's associates, too many stares, too many questions. He simply took her hand and left, making it clear that her comfort mattered more than any business connection. You did that for me? She asked later, still shaken. I'll always choose you, he said simply. Every time. And he proved it again and again, adjusting his schedule to match hers when possible, learning to make her favorite comfort foods when she had hard days, installing a cat climbing structure in his penthouse because he wanted her cats and her to feel at home there. Ruth proved her commitment too. She learned the necessary security protocols without complaint. She accepted the bodyguards that Do-hyun insisted on when she traveled alone. She met his world halfway, becoming someone his organization respected not out of fear but because she was genuinely impressive, smart, resourceful, unafraid to speak her mind even to dangerous people. You know what's funny? Ruth said one evening, curled up on Do-hyun's couch while Chairman Meow purred between them. I spent so much of my life trying to be invisible, trying not to stand out. And now I'm dating probably the most visible person in Seoul's underground. At least the visible people know about. Having second thoughts? Do-hyun asked, though his tone was light. No. Actually, I think I needed this. Needed you. You make me feel like being seen isn't scary. Like being different is actually an advantage. Like all the parts of me I tried to hide are actually the parts worth celebrating. Do-hyun set down the book he'd been reading and pulled her closer. You did the same for me. Made me remember that being powerful isn't the same as being whole. That I could be both the head of an organization and just Do-hyun. That I didn't have to choose. We're quite the pair, aren't we? The woman with heaven's eyes and the underground king. Sounds like the beginning of a good story. It is, Ruth said, kissing him softly. It really is. Outside, Seoul glittered with life. Millions of stories happening simultaneously, millions of people living their complicated, messy, beautiful lives. And in a penthouse above it all, two people who should have been impossible together proved that love could exist in the spaces between worlds, that understanding could bridge any gap, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let yourself be fully seen. Ruth's blue eyes, those eyes that had caused her so much pain and confusion, had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life she never could have imagined. And Do-hyun's carefully constructed world had been transformed by a woman who'd run from a party and accidentally found exactly what she'd been searching for. They didn't have all the answers. The future was still uncertain, still complicated, still full of challenges they'd have to navigate together. But they had each other. They had honesty. They had love that was fierce and gentle, protective and freeing, complicated and simple all at once. And really, what more could anyone ask for? Hey, Ruth said, looking up at Do-hyun with those extraordinary eyes. I love you. Just thought you should know. I love you too, he replied. And the words felt like a promise, a commitment, a choice they'd make every day for the rest of their lives. Chairman Meow meowed loudly, clearly demanding attention. They both laughed, and in that moment, everything felt exactly right.
Hello besties, in this story we learned that our differences aren't flaws to hide, they are gifts that lead us to genuine connection. True love requires courage to be vulnerable, honest, even when it's hard, and seeing the whole person beyond their surface. When we embrace our authentic selves and allow others to do the same, we discover that love can bridge any world. Hello besties, thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe and share.